Today we're talking with Dru Erridge, co-founder of Gamebreaking Studios. Dru ended up walking down a path of a co-development studio. They were initially focused on multiplayer game tech, but the reasons he got there are quite unique. He co-founded with folks he had built and shipped an indie game with, while kind of on the side of full-time jobs that they all had at larger studios. And they decided not to take money, from VC or publishing. And so they ended up doubling down on the skills that they had at hand. And all three co-founders are engineers. They ended up viewing that as a way to give them freedom to pursue their passions and really diversify the kind of work that they did as they built this business. It's been a journey full of lessons on mindset and motivation that I think can help a lot of other folks think about what kind of founding journey they want to pursue, especially in the current market, which limits where funds can come from. Let's jump in. So how I usually love to start the conversation is the way it happened for me is there was sort of a moment where I went from maybe I'll start a studio, maybe that's the right next thing, to I was emotionally and mentally committed, like this is happening. And now I have to go and figure out what that looks like, right? But I knew to my bones that that was what I was going to do. And I'm curious for you, like leading up to the founding of Gamebreaking, like what were you thinking and what pushed you over the edge where you're like, nope, this is absolutely happening?
At risk of like going all the way back to my entire history, I was always primed to be doing entrepreneurship and committed, and my time at Riot actually like pulled me back and away from that because I was really, really into the team and learning and having great mentorship, right? So my first job was for an entrepreneur in the clean tech space. And my eyes were opened like immediately, right? Like I always kind of vaguely wanted to start my own company in the way that, any ambitious kid does. And I really like tech, and, there's so much been going on in tech in the last 30 years. But so worked for him, and he was like, yeah, you just start a company, just go on LegalZoom and you click some buttons and you got a company, man. And I was like, that doesn't sound
easy.
hard. So I did that a few times, frankly. We tried to start an IT business when I was in high school, my cousin and I. Once I was in college, it was the mobile app era, and everyone was trying to start some mobile social app. And I was on probably 5 or 6 articles of incorporation for various little startup things, none of which made any money, all of which failed. I did get, McDonald's wages from one of them for a couple months. That was cool. That was the first time I got paid for programming. And then when we were leaving school, we had my senior thesis was this RTS MOBA hybrid thing called Maestros. And we were actively pitching it to publishers. We were, I talked to, there were a lot of small publishers at the time, Midnight City, I think, was one of them, and Perfect World International. And we had pitched to a bunch of folks. But ultimately, we got nothing more than a lukewarm response. And so I kind of told the team hey, let's all go get our AAA jobs and let's do this on the side. And when I signed I remember signing my contract with Riot and being oh, I'll be here 2 years and I'll try again. We'll go do it again. We'll ship this game. I'll learn some things in AAA and then I'll go back and try again. But I just, really, really appreciated all the people there. And also it didn't take 2 years to ship our game. It took 5 when we were doing it part-time. Mm-hmm. But once that game shipped, my 2 co-founders at Gamebreaking were also working on that project with me, and we were kind of just looking at each other after a couple months, I miss working with you, man. What do we do next? How do we work together again? And at that point, we were kind of trying to figure out how would we do that? Where would that start? And for me at Riot, I had this long mentorship arc, and I become a tech lead, and we had finished, finished up a bunch of things on League, and they were like, all right, go do it again for Valorant. And I was like, and Runeterra and all that other stuff. And I was like, look, we could do a better job for sure. There's lots of new things to build, but like, maybe it's time to pass the torch, right? Like, let's let someone else do it. And so I passed it on to the next tech lead. Unfortunately, the design lead also did the same thing at the same time, like within a week. But they did a great job. Yeah, so I guess we were in the unusual situation of starting a company from the standpoint of like, I want to work together again, and I've already kind of built my dream game. So my goal was, okay, I built the product I wanted to build. Now let me build a company in the games industry. And I want to work with these people, and we'll figure out the rest on the way. Straight up.
I think that leads directly into the usual follow-up question, which is, okay, you've decided you're going to start this thing. You've had a collection of incorporations in the past that maybe were not the deepest teaching of how to run a company. You're going off and doing this. So you're committed. This is happening. What did you go ahead and have to like learn and figure out once that commitment happened? You're like, oh God, now I need to learn X, Y, and Z. And you went off to go and do that.
Yeah. So there's like a couple of the usual things that I didn't have to learn, right? Like I knew where to go on LegalZoom and which buttons to click, right? Like I knew how to sign some contracts, some paperwork with like, questionably correct answers. Through the process of running Maestros, I had hired subcontractors for like publishing and marketing. Not a lot of money, right? But like a couple of small contractors. I had been a contractor at that first job, so I knew the whole like a lot of the legal side of the basics of starting a company and the basics of operating a company. So I wasn't scared by hiring contractors. I wasn't like, this is some new thing I have to do by being contractors, right? Ultimately, I knew we were going to do codev to start, right? Like we didn't want to go build something. When I was talking to folks like Sean Bender at Phoenix Labs and like, hey, who can we help do the thing we know how to do, which is like write high scale online services and help build large online games. To like start a business, like get some velocity, right? We weren't at that point looking to raise money. We hadn't ruled it out yet. We were just like, let's figure out what we're doing. Let's sign some deals and do some work and get some cash into this business. So remind me of the specific question again.
Oh, like the things you needed to go off and learn immediately once you committed to the path.
The things I needed to go off and learn. I feel like the things I needed to go off and learn were not the immediate things, right? I had managed some projects. So even our first couple of projects doing project management and even game direction to an extent on these, the first game we did was like 12 people. Like that wasn't daunting. Where it got hard and new for me was people management. So around 18 months in, I think. So we hired interns about 12 months in, and that was fine. Like you have so much to offer a person who's never worked professionally before, right? Like technically and people wise, that there's no gap there. We hired our first like full-time real, whatever, senior software engineer employee about 18 months in. And he was a close friend of mine. And I convinced him to join the company by telling him all the things that I didn't know how to do, that was going to be hard, and how little money we were going to pay him. And eventually he just said yes. But once we, started hiring people and got up to maybe 8 folks, I had never managed people before. So when around about the time we had like 8 of us, it was like, okay, we kind of have like a formal management structure, and basically everyone was kind of sort of reporting to me, except for some of the interns. And I reached out to Andre Benamou and was like, I need to learn how to be a manager, and also probably pretty soon like a manager of managers. Help. He's a leadership coach now.
So just because this is one of the ways that I think your journey is relatively unique compared to folks that we've had on in the past, you jumped into founding the studio and going the route of codev, of like, hey, we're going to take on some contracts, get money into the business. And the way you framed it, it sounds mostly like, we don't really know what we're going to do long term, so that's hard to raise money on. You can't go to a VC and be like, well, I don't know, but like we're 3 folks who like each other, right? Like you can't raise on that. And so it sounds like it was mostly a way of approaching bootstrapping and getting money into the business just to pay yourselves and make your way through. But you've definitely continued on that path of codev for a long time at this point. And so I'm curious how your thinking around the role codev would be to the business evolved or changed over that first 18-month period. Like, at what point did it go from we're just doing this to pay some bills in the short term to no, this is what we do?
That's really interesting question, because what happened in the early days of me joining the business, because the founders all joined sort of staggered, was that I was just trying to figure out and pick up some work for us. I was having 2 lunches and 2 dinners every single day to go and find people to hire us. And that was 0% success for 3 or 4 months, and then way more success than we could handle for the next 12 months. So it felt like a rocket ship that I was we didn't have a handle on, we didn't have a plan for. We picked up that 12-person game project 3 months into the company. Our third founder wasn't joined yet. So it was just hang on, it's going, and so after that project finished, I think is when I invited all the other founders over, and we're in my apartment sitting on the floor, what are we doing? What's the plan, guys? And I knew I wanted to build something enduring. You look out over the landscape of games, and it's mostly a bloodbath, over a long enough time horizon, or the last 18 months even. And I'm how do I work for myself for a long time? And how do I succeed where other companies have failed to make something enduring in the games industry? Of course, there are great success cases, but it feels whatever. It feels like rolling 6s on 100 dice to be Blizzard, right?
Yep.
Every game they released was successful, really successful, often more successful than the last one, over and over and over again. And I'm I don't think I can do that. I don't think there's many places that can do that. And we're okay, well, co-development is pretty reliable and sustainable. You get to jump around. This was around the time that what was it called? Blood, Sweat, and Pixels. One of those books came out, and the whole last couple chapters was and the answer is co-development, right? And I was hey, we're doing that, but I don't know that I was really deeply believing that conclusion of that book, but it has some fundamental truths of there's just a more foundationally sustainable business model for the company doing the co-development, even though it's still tumultuous. And then at that point, we're okay, we build from here, and where do we go? And it's well, we don't need, at that point, we were we don't need money anymore, right? We would need money to go build a specific game, but we could get to a point where we could do that on our own. And as soon as we decided we didn't need money, we said, okay, well, if we're not going to be a venture-backed studio, let's throw off all of the shackles related to that. Let's be the opposite of that. What are venture-backed studios doing? They're laser focused. I was cool, I'm going to be ADD. I'm going to do everything. But the rational side of that is diversification is the only free lunch investment, right? And I think, the conglomerate approach is the opposite of the VC-backed product startup approach. So we started to dabble, building products, building games, with codev as the steady base.
So it sounds that shift felt really good in that moment, right? Hey, cool, we figured out that this is a path forward. We actually feel excited about it. Tell me a little bit, you mentioned you have 2 co-founders and you sort of had them, everyone joined in a staggered manner. And you knew them from building a game together prior, right? So you guys are all come from, a core of development going into now this codev. Describe your other co-founders as far as what is that sort of team of co-founders that really enjoys that choice in that moment to be let's throw off all these shackles, let's dabble in a bunch of things, and let's build a codev studio that can endure the craziness of the game industry.
Yeah, so Sean and I lived in the same house through college for many years. So I've known Sean for 15 years or something like that. Like we met, maybe not at orientation, but the first week of college probably. And Sean, I think, is just like foundationally a builder and a problem solver, right? Like he doesn't care about, like he's interested in the problems of the business space, and we've always engaged. We did a little consulting project 15 years ago, but you know, me and him are like the old husband and wife couple, right? We're just always bickering, but like I love him deeply. You know, he stood at my wedding and all this other stuff, right? It's so there's that relationship. And then Taylor was also a part of that project that we worked on in college. And he continued to work on the project as a side project through his time at Disney Imagineering. And so like I just grew to understand him to be a really reliable person, and the kind of like, maybe autodidact is not the right word, but just the type of like voracious learner that just like always growing, always on a growth trajectory. And it was sort of like, oh, Dru's doing this really crazy thing. This will be a crazy opportunity for me to grow and learn. Like I think that's the way that Taylor viewed it. Because when I was thinking about this, starting the studio, Sean left first because he was just like done at Microsoft. And then I sent out an email and I was like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this thing, to the whole team from Maestros, all 50 people or whatever I think it was. And there were like a half dozen responses, and Sean and Taylor were like both big yeses, and there were some maybes, and you know, various things did or didn't work out for other people, but like that was the founding team. And they were sort of like, oh, Dru's about to do something crazy again, let's go. I think that was kind of how they viewed it. So a lot of it, like, you know, I think that it started a lot as like the things that I had a lot of conviction about, and they had this overlap with the things that Sean had a lot of conviction about. Like as soon as we made the decision to not be a VC backed company and to be running on our own steam and stuff, like Sean, you know, I feel like Sean lit up in a certain way where I got to engage all the different parts of his brain that were really excited about this problem. Like a lot of the analogy came from Sean. He's like, look, all these investors get to fire off 100 rockets on different projects. Like, I want to fire off some rockets. I don't want to be on a rocket that explodes. Like,
That makes sense. I notice in that answer, which I love, by the way, you have not described either of them from a like job perspective, right? Which is, I think, how a lot of people start thinking about co-founders of like, oh, I'm the tech co-founder, they're the, design co-founder, whatever, right? And I think that works absolutely as a quick shorthand. But often what ends up being is, you have the pragmatic one and the optimistic one, and the cynical one, and the one who tears holes in every plan, right? Like, and those can come in very interesting and wild combinations of all of these things that end up making what is a really strong, founder team that relies on each other in different ways. And so I'm curious, like, as Sean and Taylor are like, yes, I want to come on board, and this sounds great, and you're thinking about putting together that team, and even as it's developed over time, how do you look at the three of you as that sort of makeup that makes it all work, right? Like, what are the strengths and weaknesses, or like, personality types that come into play there that go above and beyond sort of job title?
yeah, no, I mean, the perfect founding team is like one of each discipline that you need to build your product. And then we were like 3 engineers. So we were not the team that was going to go build a game with just 3 of us, right? We had our art director that we've worked with, Brittany, is incredible, but we haven't been able to bring her on full time and all that. Yeah, I mean, so me and Sean are sort of like the bickering couple, because I think, like, people someone was like, Dru's the guy that just like takes a broadsword and charges over the hill. Like, he just knows, like, I just have a lot of conviction, I think, about the things that I want to do, and the things that I want to do for the industry and the people that I work with. And like, you just see things that are wrong. And I've seen things that are wrong, and I've seen things that are right, across the games industry. I have lots of friends who work in lots of different places, and I just want to do battle, right? To build things that are right, in ways that are sustainable and hard. Like, I just want the hard problems that take a long time and have results that no one else can get, because I don't have the patience for it. That makes me a little bit of a vision guy sometimes, and Sean's a detail guy, right? Like, he just tear my stuff apart. And that means when I'm like, we need process around X, And like my first pick is a terrible idea. And then Sean's like, no, I've done 10 hours of research and like this is how we should approach this process, this tool, this technology, all this stuff. So I think he falls much more into this like the kind of one of the CTO archetypes, I think, which is like really detail oriented, really research oriented, wants to get these systems in place from a technology perspective that are just really low touch. He has a really high bar for the vendors that we work with and all that stuff. And then Taylor is this interesting balancing force, right? Because I think that you're in games, you need some fun injected into it. And like I love the fun, but I'm so absorbed by the business and the production and all this other stuff. And me and Sean are so absorbed by fighting the details that I think Taylor has this perspective with people, and not his perspective, this is way with people, to inject fun into hard things, and to motivate people. That's really powerful. So I think that's kind of the dynamic. And, Taylor ends up being the deciding vote a lot of times when me and Sean are arguing, like you need the third person. And so me and Taylor have filled really similar roles at different times. And as a matter of fact, I came to him about a year ago, or yeah, almost a year ago, when we were about to lock in on this really large project. And I'm like, look, Taylor, I can't do this large project and head up this project and be the CEO anymore. So will you take up the CEO mantle while I'm on this project for a year or so? And well, at first they were both like, no, this is a terrible idea. Like that's a very bad idea. And I was like, no, I really think that this is the right way to do it. And there's just pieces of the business where like you just need to mix it up. You need fresh blood, even if it's for a little while. And anyways, I think that's been super successful for us.
So you sort of went through it a little bit, but one of the things that I always like to ask, especially with, 3 or more co-founder groups, is how do you guys come together? And like, it sounds like you have some, very well established patterns around like you and Sean, how you disagree, how you come to a decision, and how Taylor's involved in that. But like, if you really break it down for business decisions, like moving, out of the CEO role, having Taylor take it or something like it, how do you guys come to and make decisions and deal with disagreement along the way, like at that founder level?
It's a good question. I think the three of us have always gotten along well enough. Like we sat down, we tried to draw up our agreement on how we work together. And I was probably a little heavy-handed in that agreement. Like, we have equal shares in the company, but like, I was like, I'm gonna be the CEO, and like, I'm gonna push. Anyways, we've always gotten along pretty well. And I think that has led us to be sort of a consensus driven like leadership unit. And of course that's spread to the rest of the org. And sometimes that is absolutely like an anchor, right? Like we have to agree on things. But darned if it doesn't make people feel like bought in, and understood. But when we do really come to loggerheads, it's tough. And I think we've learned a lot from this consensus thing, and that there does have to be an owner on the decision. But amongst three of us, it comes down to a vote, right? Like it comes down to a vote. And as Taylor has said before, Dru, you're a very hard person to disagree with. And I think that's been a learning journey for me of, when we disagree, I just want to convince people, right? I try not to be like pushy. Like I try not to be pushy and say we're doing this because I said so. But it doesn't mean I will not try to pester you and just convince you for whatever an absurdly long amount of time, and in many, many different ways. And I think there are times when people will have conviction about things that they can't necessarily explain. And I think this comes up mostly between me and Taylor, where Taylor just has conviction about something, and I'm trying to convince them. And at a certain point, I have to back off and be like, okay, he's not going to come around, and he has a lot of conviction here, and it doesn't happen all that often, right? When someone has enough conviction to be like, no, Dru, and maybe I can't tell you why, but no. And then I'm like, okay, I have to reflect a little bit on that. And I'm probably going to try to defer to them in that situation if I can, because I know that Taylor means it,
So you started off, and I mean, have continued doing co-dev, right? Like, and that's been your main model for really having money come into the business, and Quoty Fingers fundraising is a series of contracts. I don't think we've talked a lot on the podcast about what that really functionally looks like as for a long-term business. What does it mean to be funded through co-dev? Whether that is an aspiration to always be co-dev, or whether that is sort of, what is often talked about in the co-dev space is like, oh, you're doing co-dev in order to funnel money towards what you really want to do on your own, right? So I'm curious, within whatever bounds you sort of feel comfortable sharing and talking through it, could you take us through what it means and what it has meant to be funded via co-dev?
Yeah, there's two really important tracks here, but I'll start with the direct question, which is, well, it means that for the first year, we didn't really pay ourselves much or anything, right? Like, funded through co-dev meant we were funded as founders out of our own paycheck for a while, which is common in almost any kind of business, right? But, after the first year, we basically put 250 or 500 grand in the bank, and then said, hey, why aren't we paying ourselves? There's still money coming in. And so we gave ourselves a nominal salary, like 50 grand or whatever the minimum salary in California was at the time. And, that wasn't paying any of our bills living in LA or anything, but it was, hey, we're paying ourselves and it's only been 12 months and isn't that cool? So I think, it's the result of all this. You go out, you meet a lot of people, and then they come back to you and say, hey, I need some help on a project, and I've worked with you before at one of these companies, or I've worked with someone who knows you, or I got recommended to you. And then the mechanics of a co-dev business or a consulting business are just, it's the very simplest arithmetic, right? It's person times dollars times time, or whatever, number of people times time times dollars. So in that way, it's a really straightforward arithmetic business, and you have to charge more money than you have to pay them in order to put some money in the bank for downtime and also for profit. We've never taken any money out of the business at this point. It's still growing, but we've increased our salaries so that we could sustain ourselves to a relatively, for 6 years in, it took us probably 4 years to get us a sustainable place, right? I think, I can't speak for all the founders, but I think we're all probably bleeding cash for 3 or 4 years in varying amounts, though. It wasn't just all, it was the salary was trickling up and the money that we were spending was trickling down. And we were just betting against our growth as a company and how quickly we could achieve a sustainable salary for each of us. And are there more details on that track that you're kind of digging at?
No, not really. I mean, I think some of this, a lot of how I think about approaching this stuff is, both for myself as someone who likes to learn, and, who knows, maybe my next startup will be a co-dev business, and, might as well get as much lessons as I can from someone who's been along that journey. But I also think that there's a lot of folks who are thinking about starting up a studio, right? I think that a good amount of the audience is potential founders. And, we are in a moment in the game industry where VC funding has dried up, publisher funding is pretty dry, right? And, we were talking about this before the call, even co-dev funding was not having a great last 12 to 18 months either. But, in the world of how do we get a business off the ground if venture is gone and publishing isn't there until we get a prototype built, which takes some amount of time, co-dev is sort of an obvious choice. And so just trying to help people understand what they might be getting into and how to think about that as they're getting off the ground of how many contracts do I need to set up? And I don't know that we need to get into the mechanics of exactly how much do you mark up or blah, 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 but just helping folks who might walk down that path understand it a little bit more, both from, the actual mechanic side, but also from the how you mentally handled that, right? And how you had to prepare to mentally handle it.
Yeah. So big picture, you have a product studio and you basically have very high highs and very low lows if you try to ship a video game, right? You bleed cash for 3 years, and then you either make it back or you don't. Codev, by and large, is going to have lower highs. You will not get the kind of payoffs that you get if you make League of Legends or something. And it's going to have higher lows because your income is sustainable earlier on and more predictable. But it tracks the labor market, right? Like, do you want to know how hard it is in Codev right now? Well, how hard is it to go land a job? That's how hard it is in Codev. They're not one-to-one, but the broad strokes, they follow each other, the troughs and peaks and valleys, right? So I think that the nuances under there are interesting, right? You can do Codev in different ways. You can do what's called fixed bid, right? Where you say you want to deliver this specific project for $100,000 by June, right? Well, it's already June, maybe September. and that is the highest risk way under the curve of Codev to do business, because you can do that project more quickly with fewer people, then you can make more money. But you could also lose money if you have to have more people or take longer or whatever, or you could burn people out by taking the same amount of time but having them work a ton of hours. So there's a lot of risk associated with that, but I mean, with risk comes reward, right? I think you can probably run a more profitable business if you focus on that. The other side is time and materials. You charge, the arithmetic of man month that I was talking about before. And that's very straightforward. It's also very flexible, and like customers can pivot you around all they want, right? Like people don't know what they want to build. That's true inside of companies. It's true outside of companies. It's not unique to consulting or co-development. Those of us that have worked on both sides knows it's just the same. So I find that that's better at coming to like the right outcome, unless like people are, I hate to even say unless people are really concrete about what they want, because it's just not true. They're just never very concrete about it.
They think they're concrete.
Everyone thinks they're concrete until they're not. So we lean towards time and materials billing, where we say like, look, it's going to cost you $20,000 a month for a single person in this specific role at this specific level or whatever. And then you can have them for 6 months, and then we'll talk again in 6 months. So that feels very like straightforward when you're on that side, but we kind of dabble in both, because sometimes you get a project occasionally where they don't want to do time and materials. Their deadline is clearly fixed by some release date of some game, right? Like some immovable thing. And they have a really clear piece of work that they want you to do. And frankly, they want very little engagement in how you do it. I don't usually find that to be the most healthy project way to work, right? Like if you've ever been on any project where like scope is fixed and resources are fixed, like it can get really gnarly in there. And you've either overplanned or underplanned, right? But we've done a few of those. They can be fun, right? Like you're shipping stuff, right? Like you're getting in the trenches and shipping things. And when you get into negotiate, like I don't know that I'm the world's best negotiator. I don't think I'm the world's best negotiator. But I just like to like set the bar high for my people and for our customers, and work on projects where the outcomes are going to clearly be great for all of us. That puts some like limiters on, I think, probably the scale of, I don't think I'm going to be keywords eventually. Like I'm not going to be a mega huge business, but it does make our projects feel a lot better, I think, than a lot of stories I hear about consulting. The parallel track here, if I can divert us a little bit, is
absolutely
what it means to be a company doing co-development.
Yeah.
In games, which is to say, maybe I believe that's the right path, but maybe other people are here for different reasons. So why are we doing co-development? We're doing co-development because we're building a diversified business, because, ultimately I wanted to build something very enduring. And I believe that's the way to do it. It's one of the ways to do it. And that we have this solid foundation, and that we diversify by building products, because we have a tool that we sell, and like B2B products, and then B2C products, like building games, which we're also doing a little bit of right now. The road, if you join a business like this and your goal is to work on independent IP quickly, it won't happen quickly. It'll happen opportunistically or slowly or both. And that is the trade that I made. The trade that I made is I'm not building a codev business to build up a war chest so that I can go build a game and then be done doing co-development. I wanted to build a company. I want Gamebreaking to be here in 20 years and, people to build careers there. That's something I really care about, is job stability in the games industry. And it's hard to come by in a lot of places. And that's like one of the North Stars, I think, about a lot of the decisions I made with the company. And so we do invest in original stuff. We do invest in building products, but the investments are small and they're drawn out over long periods of time. So when we started Bespoke CI, which was kind of our first clear investment, I was like, here's 50 grand, right? Like 6 months of runway or whatever to go and sign up 5 customers. And if we get good signal, then we'll start putting a team behind it. And for the original game that we started in 2023, or started in 22, tried to pitch in 23. It was kind of similar. We hired a design director and I was like, okay, we've got like 12 months of budget for you to make this happen. And then, 3 or 6 months in, put a little team behind it for prototyping once we've gotten through the idea, chosen the idea that we want to work on. And the original game business, after 12, 15 months, we didn't find a purchase for it. And we ultimately had to lay off the design director and fold that team back into co-development. Well, we folded the team back into co-development, and like ideally the design director would be able to find some work, but it's easier for me to find engineering work than game design work. So ultimately we couldn't find the work, and that was when we had to lay them off. But one layoff versus a whole game team, right, is a better trade-off, I think, than having to lay off a whole game team that you built up, and then you have to go build it from scratch the next time.
Yeah, absolutely. So thinking about that, this journey that you've been on, that what I really like is your conviction about why and how you're doing it, right? Like, I think in many ways, Codev, I've always sort of not had a clear picture of why people necessarily both do Codev and then stick with Codev. And in many cases, for some folks I've talked to, it's like the fallback position of like, okay, we can't get funding this way, so we're going to go and do Codev. And I like your perspective that you've brought to it of like, here's how this is the intentional play. But as you've gone along that journey, what's been the hardest part of it for you, right? Like you're obviously clearly committed to it. You've thought this through in a lot of ways, but you've been at this for a while, right? Like, and so what's been that really hard challenge for you personally, walking down this path that you've chosen to walk down?
100%, it has been recognizing that there are people who I love and respect and want to work with forever, who do not have the patience for this plan to play out, right? And that's fine. They're or they thought they did, and then they change their mind about what they want to do, right? And they go and do something else. Maybe they go and work on a game product because they don't want to wait another couple of years to do it, or they're more invested in just working on games in genres that they love than business building, team building, culture building, right? Like those are big focuses for me. And just coming to terms with that and being okay with that. Like I knew I chose a hard path and a long path, and I knew that not everyone would want to choose that path, but I think it's a different thing entirely to know that people will come and go on your journey, right? And it will be the right time for them to be on that path for some segment of it, and not others.
Do you find that it's worse or more acute than sort of that same journey that you might have had at Riot or another sort of product company, where I think for any given company and any given individual's journey, like those it is rare that those overlap for, decades. It's more that they overlap for a couple of years and then disperse. And sometimes, to your earlier point, that dispersal is, well, we're out of money, and so everyone is forcibly dispersed to the winds. But sometimes it's absolutely hey, it was the right fit for me at this right time, and then I've wandered off. Do you is it more keen here, or is it more it's your business and so you feel it more keenly that way?
It could absolutely be the latter, but I feel like, when you're a kid and you've got like, you go in, you got grades every year, and you've got like elementary school and then middle school and then high school and then college, but then like you become an adult and it's just like you're just staring out into the endless future. I feel like shipping games in some ways is more like going through college and high school and all this stuff, because it's so you have these really clear start and end points, right? Like you start a game and then you ship a game, and even if everyone on that team loved each other, you can have a ton of people leave after they ship the game. There's this is like, you can look anywhere like this. It's just got this really nice clear stopping point, and you kind of can't, like, at that point, I don't think I would, like, fault people is not the right word, but like I wouldn't be surprised, right? It's like, okay, we've come to a natural end. There's a fork in the road, and you're going to decide. Co-development is like a much more contiguous road, because you're there for a lot of starts and stops, but you're not on like this clear 3 to 5 year journey, which is a very reasonable time to be at one company and deliver a product and then leave. And also in the game industry, there's sometimes too much incentive for you to stay regardless of the situation, to stay through shipping. So co-development just feels like this more like one long journey in a lot of ways. And then, like, yeah, it's my journey, and I have a lot of conviction about this mission, and I think that the people who join oftentimes also do, but that doesn't mean that, you know, they're gonna travel the whole road, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you've been going on this journey, and as you said, like, the highs are not quite as high, but the lows are not quite as low. What have you done, and what have you found that most supports yourself as an individual going along this track and experiencing those highs and the lows and the uncertainty and the ebb and flow of the industry, as they say?
That's a good one. What sustains me, as it were, in this thing?
Yeah, what sustains you, or what? I mean, I think sustain is probably the right word on it, but like, what do you do? What do you need to keep yourself sane? What do you need to keep yourself moving forward? How do you best find the way as an individual to surf the highs and lows in a way that is sustainable for yourself?
Um, I'm definitely one of those people who's kind of like, variety is the spice of life, and you need to shake things up a little bit. So it's been very good that our roles are not super rigid on the founding team, right? Like, we've shifted around a lot. We it's almost like a running joke that, like, running admin and business administration is like a hot potato that we pass around every year or two, amongst the founders. Like, that's the one that no one really loves to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's lots of other stuff that is undergoing the same, like, transfer of, like, okay, you're in charge of this thing now. Sean has been laser focused on building a B2B product in bespoke CI, but the nature of the leadership breakdown this year, it was like, Sean, you're in charge of the Kickstarter and launch of this game re-release we're doing, and like, that's been a whole brand new thing for him, that he's been totally killing it on. And it's just like the facets of your founders and your leadership team that you see when you're fluid about roles and responsibilities. So that variety gives me a lot of life and sustenance. And also, I think, we kind of give you, we're all programmers, right? So like, we always kind of try to give someone, when they're really feeling it, give them a break, let them program for a few months, like, then get back in the, get back in. And that's really revitalizing. So I think that's a lot of it. It's funny, the things that give you life in a business. Just hiring someone, or like bringing in interns or whatever, just new perspectives in a company are just powerful. Really, really powerful to everyone's morale and motivation, including myself. Right, even if it's whatever, summer interns for 12 weeks or something.
What do you see on the horizon for both yourself as an individual on this journey, right? Like, things that you think are coming up for you as a founder that you either need to learn or grow from or whatever else, but also the company that you're thinking a lot about. Like, this isn't quite what is keeping you up at night. It's generally a little bit more like forward thinking and forward planning, but like, what is occupying a lot of your, oh, I need to be prepared for this thing in the future?
I think there's a lot of reconciling what my role will be for the next several years. Not so much because of company shifting, but fatherhood has put a wrench into the mix. there's a lot that I have to do at home now. I have a beautiful daughter. She's 3, and it changes your relationship with work. You know, I was a workaholic, right? Like let's just put that out there. I was a workaholic, and it never, for years, I mean, a decade, it just never. I never felt the burnout. I think is what happened. I never felt the burnout in the way that not never, like I felt the short and small burnouts, and you know, you
Hmm.
take a rest and you get back at it, but like it was energizing, not draining for me to, especially as a business owner. For me, it was like as long as I can work on 2 or 3 things instead of just one thing, then I can work like that many days in a day, right? Like I can work 8 hours
Hmm.
on this and then 8 hours on this. Well, I can't work more than 8 hours on one thing. Probably more like 4 or 5 or 6, right? Like I
Hmm.
have I have to be doing different things. But now, like one of those whole things is my daughter, right? And so, as much as we've always talked about like how do we pass the torch to the next level of leadership and all this other stuff, there's really like a huge forcing function now that me and Taylor have children to really put that into action, because there's just no time for, or very limited time for, that stuff to bleed over into. And it's really cool, right? Because we're far enough along the business. We're not huge, but we're far enough along the business, and there's enough solidified process and stuff where this doesn't feel crazy, right? Even if we have to grow, you know, hopefully we'll grow to 50 people in the next couple of years, right? Like I think things are picking up again. We had that trajectory, right? Like we've been planning for that for a while. And it felt like, yeah, we got to pause. The industry gave us a pause on that plan, or like a spin your wheels on that plan, but
Hmm.
it's starting to gain traction again. But uh, yeah, if now we're getting into organizational dynamics, but like when every problem fails upward, right? If you ever tap capacity at the top, then that's a bad failure plan. And of course, we had points where that happened before I was a father, but there was just so much more flex capacity when, like, if I had to work my entire night to get something done, I would do it. And, you know, obviously I talk about job stability and like anti-crunch basically as like really core foundational founding things for game breaking studios. But you know, personally, I kept I had a lot of passion and I want to work on things, but now there's just the time's not even there, even if I wanted to. And I'm also just more tired.
Hmm.
So yeah, reconciling my
Kids definitely
role.
ruin everything.
Yeah. They ruin everything in a beautiful, wonderful, very, very fun way.
Yes, exactly.
But yeah, reconciling my role and getting back to, because we had it for a little while, the diversified game breaking. That's not just a code of business. It's it's a code of business and these other things, and everyone feels like their responsibilities are, they have a nice little domain for their responsibilities, right? Like, um, because I think people, when they get that autonomy to run teams and do that, there's just so much velocity there, right? People really get excited. Yeah.
So I like to end the main part of the interview with I think is usually an entirely unfair question. I have a feeling it's less unfair in your case, only because you have a clear pattern at this point. But given the experience thus far, if you fast forward a few years, who knows what happens with game breaking? Like no finger on the scale of whether it's considered a positive or outcome, or it closes up. Would you found another company? Would you do this whole journey again, or some variation of it?
I would. I absolutely would. It's been interesting because I think the answer has always been yes immediately. And maybe right now the answer is like, yeah, but maybe I would take a break. But there's always been 2 or 3 things kind of floating around there. One of them is I did my management experience trial by fire. Wouldn't it be nice to maybe go somewhere where I could have a little bit of, I don't know, a little bit of training? It's been so long. It's such a silly thing to say. I'm sorry to all my direct reports, right? Like I'm 4 or 5 years into management and I've never had any training, and I want to like go back to school for it. But that's like something super foundational to me, is oscillating in my career and stuff, oscillating between leadership and being a follower, and learning how to be an excellent follower and an excellent leader, I think just makes you better at both jobs. And conversely, like too much time in one role can kind of atrophy your empathy for the other side, I think. And so a part of me says, well, I shouldn't lead another company right away, even if I were to join one. And then the other part of me says, well, I'd love to go back to school because I don't know. I think it's important to be a noob at something as often as you can to learn new things.
The way I tend to close out interviews is what I call the introspection lightning round, which is a series of relatively fast fire questions. We'll go through them. Where this actually came from is these were a series of questions that I would give people when I was doing co-founder dating in preparation for sort of our first sit down coffee, let's have a really good chat. And we would both show up with the answers to these. And it was a way to sort of start that process of like, are we going to be good founders, co-founders together and that kind of thing. And so we're just going to run through them really quick and see how you land on them. And the first one is, what is your superpower?
Bender gave me this one. And I have like a kind of a generic answer of like breaking down really large problems into smaller ones. But it's kind of, there's the engineer side of that, which I hope I do pretty well. But then I think there's this, peopleware or whatever side of it, like the organizational brain of getting groups of people to break down problems and be able to execute them is the thing that I feel uniquely equipped to do when I come onto a team. I've never like looked at a problem of any shape, right? Like building a company, building a team, building a game, some software product, and not been like, okay, I can see it where we can start, right? Like, I can tell you the steps that we start with. I can tell you the sequence, even if some of those sequences are like research, right? Whereas I think some people get paralyzed when they look at a problem like that. I don't have a lot of I haven't had that feeling often. So like, and that's probably just because I had a really broad set of experiences. I've done like a lot of event planning. I did a lot of startup B stuff, and those two things I think give you that like, well, you I guess you have just enough tools on the width where it's like, yeah, I can start calling people, right? Like, if nothing else, you can start calling people, and doing cold calling for various whatever projects and stuff is I think where some of those doors start to break down. It's like, oh, I don't know how to do X, and I don't know anyone who knows how to do X. And then my answer is like, well, I could just Google it and call that guy, like, and that's like something that wouldn't occur to some people.
Outside of your superpower, what are your biggest strengths?
I think driving towards concrete consensus is like a superpower or strength for me. Like I tend to run more consensus driven, which can be a difficult thing for organizations. But it's because I've been pretty good at driving the consensus, right? Like getting the room to agree on something, right? There's always compromise. There's always X, Y, or Z. But I think it's a combination of like driving it there and also just kind of reading the room to see it, like see what the threat is that everyone agrees on.
Yeah, so driving not to everyone being on the same page as you, but everyone being on the same page that they all share.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
And then the flip side of that, of course, what are your big weaknesses?
Well, certainly the flip side of that is an easy one, right? Like consensus is slow, and so decision making can be slow sometimes if I lean too hard into that tendency. My biggest weaknesses, I am, well, there's a bunch of different things here. I have like borderline short term memory loss, which I mostly combat with organization, but that's like I think a cheap answer. I think I have a great deal of a great desire to do things that are right for people and like do right for people in the abstract.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm good at that. And my ability to like read a room and see the thread that they all share is like pretty good. But I think one-to-one sometimes my ability to read an individual person and their needs and motivations can be weak at times, and I do need to be told really explicitly. Like my wife is my wife because she tells me exactly what she wants. Like and that can be really difficult for me sometimes when people are not clear with their needs or their motivations. Because sometimes I will kind of, you'll lead to a generalization or an assumption, which comes from that like trying to read the thread. And I think in a room of people that can be really good. But with an individual person, being off by a little bit is really meaningful sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. What behaviors crop up when you're under a lot of stress? Like, what are your sort of stress reaction behaviors?
I think it took me like 15 years to learn this. I think I just learned this last year. I carry a ton of stress in my body, like just physically. Like I'm just tense all the time when I'm stressed, and that was really hard to learn because I didn't manifest it in a lot of other ways. Like I wasn't yelling at people, or I'm usually pretty even keeled on that front. And then I think like if it gets really extreme, I think it goes more on that depression end where I'm like, and then I don't want to talk to anyone, and I boot up Magic Arena and I buy myself a milkshake and I sit there and I just play an uncomfortable, like an unhealthy amount, and then I wake up tired, and like
Mm-hmm.
that cycle I think is on the really far end of it, but it takes me a really long time to get there. So in the interim, I'm just like, why does everything in my body hurt all the time? It's like you're sleeping like this and you're like like just clenched against your chest and all this other stuff, just carrying a lot of stress physically. And the outlet for that is exercise, which I'm not good at doing. I don't it's not that I don't enjoy it, it's that it's really hard between baby and business and all the other stuff to just like get out on my bike, which is the ideal.
And then finally, what are your, you will actually understand this reference because you are a Magic player, which is where the term comes from. What are your upkeep needs? What are the things that need to happen professionally on a regular basis for you to not drift into stress reactions or not go insane?
It's change in diversity. So like when I drifted into a much higher stress reaction earlier last year, my job was one thing and one thing only, and it was landing the one deal that was going to get us through the next year. And it was just like 6 9 months of that. And of course, like that's just a crushing level of stress on its own. But I think the thing that killed me the most about it was when that was the only thing going on. And in comparison to doing that side by side with a project or side by side with whatever, like the time where I actually was able to like pull myself out of that, I actually just ended up picking up a creative project. I was building a cube, a magic cube, sort of like a little game design project in the evenings, and that was the thing that kind of helped pull me out of that really high stress cycle. Um, was to have more than one thing to focus on.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for hanging out and answering the questions and taking us through your journey. If anyone was listening to this and was like, holy crap, I want to talk to Dru and learn more about what he thinks about magic cubes or whatever else, what's the best way for them to get out and then reach out to you?
LinkedIn is definitely the easiest. You can find me DruErridge, Dru Erridge. I'm also on the site formerly known as Twitter occasionally, not as often. And you can probably even find my email if you're really looking on the internet for it. But all of the other places that are not LinkedIn are poorly managed. So try to get me on LinkedIn.
Well, thank you again, and really glad to have you on.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a good one, Carl.
Thanks for listening to the entire episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it with your friends or anyone you think could benefit from it, and leave us a positive rating or subscribe. This episode was edited by Christopher Delano, music by Jake Hall, who's available for composer work in games. And if you're interested in learning more about the Game Founders support community, go to gamefounders.org or email me at carl@gamefounders.org. Thanks so much.